brain. Really ain't no difference if that nigga gay.
Blood satellite.
And then there's this article, back to what we really started on, Microplastics in the Brain, a new study conducted by University of Rhode Island professor Jamie Ross investigating the infiltration of microplastics in mammals has revealed that this is far more widespread than initially thought. In fact, the plastic particles were found to bioaccumulate in every organ, including startlingly enough, the brain. Research on the health effects of microplastics, especially in mammals, is still very limited, he says. But basically what he's saying here is that the microplastics, we're all used to microplastics in your blood. Oh, there's little tiny plastic in your blood. It's in the fish, just like mercury. But it's in your brain, and it's causing cognitive failure. It's causing mood alterations.
Yeah.
Many studies have demonstrated how microplastics make their way into our bodies through food and water. However, researchers say microplastics are even tiny enough to enter the bronchioles and get trapped in different parts of the airway branches. Some numbers show humans could be inhaling the equivalent of an entire credit card's worth of plastic within a week.
A study in the Netherlands analysed blood from 22 people, plastic detected in 17 of them.
Plastic? Why would you want that in you?
Microplastics will get into anything. I mean, it's the nature of the beast.
I'm shocked that it's in the blood, yeah. How would it get in the blood?
While shocking to some, to scientists,
unfortunately, it's not surprising.
Microplastics have previously been detected in animal blood, in human faeces and placentas. And while the study found it in the blood of 80% of its sample group, it could be worse in New Zealand.
He says that brain infiltration may cause a decrease in glial fibrillary acidic protein called GFAP, a protein that supports many cell processes in the brain. Results have shown. Previous studies have just suggested that GFAP expression might decrease in early stages of neurodegenerative diseases. So long story short, the amount of plastic that is found in it may very well give people Alzheimer's. And if something, they'll use that because that gets enough people to perk up, right? Or if it gives you cancer. Cancer is the big scary one. But if something causes cancer, it causes a constellation of other more subtle problems as well.
Right.
So yeah, if it can cause Alzheimer's, can it also cause destabilization of moods? Can it cause an increased anxiety or lethargy or all of this stuff? And so again, you have a generation, us, this includes us as well, but them even more, that biologically things are stacked against them. Like they're being born, they may very well be born not only into a strange COVID environment, that's Gen Alpha, where they're not socialized properly because they were locked inside for 3 fucking years. But then also the plastic in their brain is making them insane as a toddler, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's just something that I try and be cognizant of. Like when we talk politics, because when we talk politics and ideologies and political systems, in a sense, we're trying to project them into the future. We're interested in designing something that has legacy. And I always try and come back to, like, people will talk about, the problems with gender is a big thing, and depression and suicide and stuff. But I'm like, this seems like a nuclear bomb going off on the horizon that just hasn't reached us yet, but it will. And I don't think it's localized to North America. It can't be. To me, it seems obvious that half of all Indians have to be made of plastic by this point, right?
Well, there's not in this article, but I've seen it written that they found it in like forest streams in the mountains and in ice caps, and like it's everywhere because it's in the water system, right? And these particles are small enough that they can actually evaporate and float in the jet stream. Like they're microscopic. So yeah, it's a new type of toxin that now exists essentially everywhere.
It kind of led into this other article I read, and I'm connecting some interesting dots here, but I think this to me is more important than talking about Trump. This to me is more interesting than talking about the latest Indian guy that's gonna kill wokeness, because maybe wokeness doesn't exist in this world, but it's DARPA-funded study uses AI to detect violations of social norms in texts. And this is on a site called Extreme Tech. But it's got some links here, and I got the paper here pulled up in front of me. This is actually on nature.com. The title of the paper itself is AI for Identifying Social Norm Violation. This was published in 2023, but I'll just read the article that references the paper here. It says the Pentagon's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, otherwise known as DARPA, a name that's known to a great many people in our scene.
DARPA has always been at the forefront of artificial intelligence, driving the technology forward. So it's no surprise that we have some pretty definitive views as to where it's headed. There's been a lot of hype and bluster about AI. Talk about a singularity, that AI will exceed the capability of human beings, maybe even displace humanity. We're going to take a much more level-headed approach and attempt to demystify, talk about the technology, what it can do, what it can't do, and where it's headed.
Back to its very beginning, DARPA has been at the forefront of support, advocacy, and leadership in artificial intelligence.
J.C.R. Licklider, the first director of IPTO in '63, set the foundation with a decade of work in AI.
DARPA funded some very early work in machine learning back with Project Mac.
The shaky robot was the first system to combine reasoning with physical action.
The mother of all demos that included the newly invented mouse, hypertext, word processing, and distributed collaboration.
Speech understanding was one of the early AI projects along with vision and robotics.
With funding provided by the agency, researchers at Israel's Ben Gurion University have created an AI that detects violations of social norms. The tool reliably spots infringements on 10 different types of social norms, offering psychologists and sociologists a unique way to track human behavior. So what they're saying is that it can scan a paragraph of text or a chat log and rank whether or not the things you are saying deviate from acceptableness. And it says the tool identifies violations across 10 social norm types, and those are competence, politeness, trust, discipline, caring, agreeableness, success, conformity, decency, and loyalty. And even though, you know, we can say what we will about the AI, that's an interesting set there. I never actually seen it laid out like that. Like, here's the 10 factors that make it so someone fits in to whatever like the zeitgeist is, right? Politeness. So it could say like, we can scan this text, and even though there's no terroristic threats, there's nothing really that jumps out at you, they can tell from the tone, oh, this person sounds a bit disagreeable, a bit the thing they're talking about. Oh, they're talking about the government. Oh, but I detect a bit of dissonance here with they seem displeased with the government. Oh, and they seem paranoid. Uh-oh. So, and they also do seem disciplined. So they're disciplined and they're paranoid. Let's flag that. So they found, and this is just a test they did at this university, but like all conspiracy theories, we come back to, well, why not? Right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't this be used? And why wouldn't this be used in a world where we already talked about at the beginning, the topic of the day is misinformation. That's all any side is talking about, just with different tones and different, language. But it's the, fake news versus misinformation. It's the exact same argument that's occurring. Okay. So this is going to be used, hypothetically, to ferret out the misinformers. And it can be used to get all the, antisocial personalities and what defines an antisocial personality, of course. And I just thought that was interesting to let people know that seems to me to be something that, if that's not being employed right now, I'd be very surprised. Because we're used to, your emails are being read, so they're looking for key phrases. Don't use these certain phrases. Let's try and use dog whistles. But this is a dog whistle detector. This is the equivalent of them going through your house and looking for fingerprints. Like, this is like weird forensics. Like, there's going to be And this to me is the scariest thing of all, the idea of psychologists being brought in to like interpret these flags. Like they're not even talking to you. They've got your texts and they've got the printout from the AI, and the psychologist looks at that printout and diagnoses you based on that. You're not involved in this process at all, but it already has the stamp of academia on it. That's where I kind of see this going. And I think that's tied in, you know, like we talked about with Eric Weinstein, this is all connected because it's like the world we live in, we're already used to being watched all the time. And that was the comment made about Zoomers too. Like they're in a world where they're used to being watched and being critiqued, and they assume that everything they're doing is being recorded, and they want that too. They want to be recorded. So we have these generations. I don't know how to avert the ship. I don't think that ship can be averted. I think that's just the reality now, that the successive generations might not even understand secrecy like we do or privacy like we do, and they're full of plastic, and even the ones who are in that who don't like it, they'll eventually not know any different. Anyway, that's more interesting to me than talking about voting anyway.
Yeah, and it's telling too that it's not a big issue outside of our circles, really. Like that like people are swimming in this water and they don't even seem to care. So
you know what? One more thing that Eric Weinstein mentioned is that he uses a phrase, and there's probably another synonym for this or another phrase, but he was discussing Jeffrey Epstein, and he described it as an anti-interesting phenomena, which is different than an uninteresting phenomena, because he says like this, that Jeffrey Epstein's story is a slam dunk for a Pulitzer Prize if you were to really like uncover it. Like the journalists should be salivating about this, because no one's really done the work to uncover the story of Jeffrey Epstein. No one really digs deep into his suicide. Not really. No one has really done the forensic accounting on his financial institution. Like he says he was a currency trader. No one can find anyone who did business with him. No one can find where his fortune came from, but there are records, but it's just this black box. That seems like something some enterprising journalist would be into, and none of them are. And it seems that every news anchor, every pundit, every journalist out there is like, oh, no one gives a shit about the Jeffrey Epstein story. And it's like, no, everyone does. That's all people want to fucking talk. They're still talking about it. But it's so strange that that's just the opposite of interesting for the people who should find it interesting.
See, this is one of the most uncomfortable things. I think there was a time when people said collusion or coordination, the presumption was, well, that's pretty far out there. We now know, like post Elon Musk's $44 billion adventure at Twitter, that there are these coordinating groups, coordinating social media with the intelligence community or with the Department of Homeland Security or with the State Department. We now know that we're living in an orchestrated, curated, choreographed world. And we can't know it officially, but we all know it if we want to know it.
And just like all the stuff we're talking about, that's why RFK Jr. was so interesting to me. Is like, this is the only guy talking about vaccines. The only guy I think in politics I've ever seen who's talking about that. Like, yeah, why isn't anyone talking about this? No one's talking about what happened during COVID. No politician is talking about what happened during COVID. Have you noticed that? Has anyone? We're just done with that.
Didn't happen. According to a lot of them, it didn't even happen.
Conservatives, no one. It's done. Okay, fine, sure. We're not talking about Epstein. We're not like any of the big fucking topics that are on the horizon. Like, I'd expect a couple of them to talk about this UFO disclosure shit. Like, just it's in the news. Like, can someone just acknowledge that these things exist, but they're anti-interesting phenomena, and that's what makes me think that they actually matter, or that investigation into them would uncover something that is more interesting and it's new and newsworthy. Like, if you were to really peel back the layers on the UFO disclosure, maybe you'd find something really fucked up. Something about maybe it is fake, and we find out why they're doing this. But is any journalist really taking this seriously? Is any journalist taking that shit seriously? No. why? What the fuck else is that? What are you doing? What else is there to talk about? Apparently, you know, fucking saying misinformation is a threat to our democracy. Anyway, I got off on a bit of a ramble there. What we got to do is we got to talk about modern monetary theory.
Oh boy, here we go.
I led with Warren Mosler because that was sort of a lead into this book, which is more of a accounting of the history of precisely what we talked about last episode: modern monetary theory, the decoupling of the dollar from the gold standard, and the current financial state that we seem to be in, with multi-trillion-dollar deficits, and like, what does that mean? What can be done about it? How did we actually get there? And it really comes back to the central bank, and this really comes back to the Princes of the Yen episode, which we talked about 2 episodes ago. That's kind of like another story from across the pond during the 20th century of what happened, because a lot of the things that affected America, like the Great Depression, like, you know, the baby boom, even like, you know, like the decoupling of the dollar from the gold standard, that affected everyone across the world. So you see, usually when a huge economic event happens in America, it's happening elsewhere. You just don't really hear much about it. The Japanese example is just one, but, you know, throughout fucking Saudi Arabia, the same things are happening. So really it comes back to the Federal Reserve, and it comes back to central banks generally, and the same sort of power play that was happening in Japan is happening in America. Sort of the power of the central bank versus the power of, you know, the people setting the monetary policy in America to set interest rates and whatnot. And again, feel free to jump in at this. I liked what happened last time. I want jump in, call bullshit, or expand or contract, you know, the credit that I'm putting out there. So really the book, it's called The Money Revolution. The Money Revolution by Richard Duncan. The subtitle is How to Finance the Next American Century. So what the book does is the first half of it is explaining the financial market and the American economy as it stands right now.
It's called the Money Revolution, How to Finance the Next American Century. And the goal of that book was to really try to persuade the American public and U.S. policymakers that we're living in a new economic environment now in this post-Bretton Woods era that really does make it possible for the government to invest in a very large scale in new industries and technologies.
The second half of the book is proposing, okay, what can we do about this? And this is where I think you'll find the most to disagree with, because he's more or less proposing what we were talking about last time, which is that, okay, it seems that the government is just playing around with credits and ramping up deficit spending. We might as well put that deficit spending into something that can generate growth and maybe fucking outpace this.
Now, America can invest. You know, we can grow by investment, investing in new industries and technologies. We don't have to settle for 1 or 2% GDP growth a year. We can invest on such a large scale that we could induce a new technological revolution that would turbocharge U.S. economic growth, and at the same time, over the next decade, produce technological miracles and medical marvels, and generally make everyone's lives better. So rather than continuing on in this long period of stagnation that the United States has been in now for decades, that has resulted in the middle class being hollowed out and disappointed with their prospects in life and the prospects for their children.
Because I will say the connective tissue between these 2 episodes, and I want to start by giving credit to your position. And I think one of the best arguments against modern monetary theory, and first of all, actually, let me just say the modern monetary theory as it's explained in this book and by Richard Mosler and others is that it's more of just an assessment of how things seem to operate, regardless of whether or not you like it or not. In fact, a lot of people who identify don't even like it. Like Richard Mosler would say, like, taxation is just theft. They only do it just to take money from you. And it is what it is.
I totally agree with, and that's actually one of the. We cashed this out a little bit in the chat afterwards, but that's one of the reasons I think it's so dangerous is because Mosler, as much as I don't like him personally, because I think there's a game there. The way that he explains it is and many of the points he makes are kind of inarguable. If you want to disagree with them, you have to dig into the rhetoric and the way they're explained. Like as you say, MMT is presented in an academic way as, look, this is just how things are. We may as well use it to our advantage. But my problem with that is you're talking past the deal. You're essentially saying, we're currently being raped. We may as well become rapists is another way of phrasing that. Right? And that's the reason that I don't like it. But he's not proposing that they do anything other than what they're already doing. He's just proposing that they target it differently.
Yeah.
So.
And let me just, to lead in with this, and I think I might have mentioned it on the last episode too, but I do want to just underline it here. It's that, and it mentions it in this book as well as one of the dangers of this whole system. It's like, you always need to stay ahead of the deficit. The idea is if you can just create credit infinitely, you still need to grow the economy at 2% every year to stay ahead of it. And if growth ever stops, it all fucking collapses.
Right, of course.
And there was one of our biggest friends of the show, Kel, we were kind of discussing this, and he's a huge advocate of it. And you know, a lot of people in our sector are advocates of it as well. And they go, well, you know, life needs growth to survive. And he'll say that, right? You know, you need growth to survive. And the moment you stop growing, you die. And so you always have to keep growing. My maybe, what would you call it, metaphysical response to that, because this isn't me basing it on any study or chart. It's just me intuiting that you can't grow forever. Like there's no life form that grows forever. Nothing in the universe seems to just, or like maybe the universe can expand forever in a sense, but like any energy producing thing, that anything that grows eventually contracts and dies. We have never seen an organism that just lives forever. And as I say that, I do know there's some organisms that can just kind of copy themselves forever. I don't count that as growing necessarily. Like there's certain types of worms that can sort of clone themselves and produce exact copies. But that to me is not like a single organism that just keeps growing and growing and growing and doesn't contract. So the idea, it just feels wrong somewhere in there to say that, well, we can just keep growing forever.
It's also just it's the naturalistic fallacy. Like, who gives a fuck about your comparison to nature, even if it were true? It's not true, but even if it were, I don't care, because it doesn't apply to the economy. It doesn't apply to groups of people in aggregate over time.
Yeah. So I'm like, you know, and this is actually what happened in Princes of the Yen. Just as a rehash there, you know, the Japanese war economy, the economy that was mobilized for war, that became mobilized for trade after the end of World War II. The argument there, and a lot of people miss this, but the argument there was that the Bank of Japan, the central bank, did reorient the Japanese economy from a mass production, arguably a war economy, to more of a service-based, consumer-based economy. And, you know, a lot of people will say, well, the Bank of Japan, they did that because they're greedy. It's like, or maybe they were right, because the problem was that the Japanese, all their businesses, all their firms, they needed access to the global marketplace because their consumer base was capped. You can only sell and trade so much internally before there's just that much population. If you want access to the global network, well, you had to play ball with the power players, mainly America. America kind of set the standard, but everyone else, the EU as well. It's not a war that you win. It's a party that you attend. And so they realize, well, to attend this party, we need to kind of change how we do things. That will mean a stronger economy overall. You know, we can't like trade ourselves until we're the only companies left in the world. That's unlikely. So the idea there was that there are certain prohibitions to growth unless you drastically change how you do things. And what changed was the entire Japanese economy in the 90s into what it is today. That was outlined in Princes of the Yen. That part kind of gets missed at the end because a lot of people think that was just a wrong turn. But I'm like, I'm making the argument that maybe they were right, you know, even though they went about it in a conspiratorial way. But I'm like, you know.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to pin it on them like it was a huge disaster, then you'd have to say Japan is much worse off than the rest of us and will continue to get worse off. And to be frank, I don't think that's true. I think they had a bad time with the Asian, market crash, and when was that, in the mid '90s. But at this point, I would much rather Canada and the U.S. look like Japan than look like industrially, commercially, economically. I would prefer to have Japan's system than to have what we have right now. So.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go through some of the points here that summarize how this all works and how this all fits together, just to reiterate and just to bring people up. So while the Federal Reserve can create or retract money based on demand, it typically only creates credit and deposits in the accounts of banks. So it can increase the money supply and give everyone money, but usually what they do on the day-to-day or year-to-year is just make credit deposits in the accounts of these big banks, and then those banks lend that out in the form of loans to the businesses or the people or whoever it might be, usually businesses or people who want to start businesses. But that decision is usually left up to the banks, and those banks can operate in concert in a cartelized sort of way, but that's generally the system, how it works. And historically, the way this worked was each bank and the Federal Reserve it held its assets in gold and loans and government securities, while the Fed's liabilities were credit creation. And historically, the Fed could only create credit based on its gold reserves, and that was the cap. So it could only loan credit 35% based off its gold reserves. So if you wanted to release more credit, you needed more gold. And it was always tethered to how much gold you have. And the banks were as well. You could only loan out so much credit, so many loans, if you had this much gold in it. And if you didn't, well, then you needed more gold. And the argument, largely in the book, and this is backed up by history, is this just went away. It went away around the time the dollar became untethered from the gold standard, but it was chipped away bit by bit for years before that. And there's a lot of crises that caused that. World War II was a big one. But, over time, just like in Princes of the Yen, the central bank was making arguments to the government that, we should just have no restrictions at all. And it doesn't take that long to just wear the government down. And it happened over the exact same amount of time in the 20th century, too, which is funny, the parallel between America and Japan, even though Japan set its economy up based on the German model. And the funny thing is that the Federal Reserve wasn't even around very long until World War I occurred and completely changed what the Federal Reserve was supposed to be. So World War I drastically changed the purpose of the Federal Reserve and the amount of assets. Their assets during that skyrocketed 2,300% within the first 6 years of its existence. So in the first 6 years, it immediately starts printing money, giving out credit, and is used for this completely different thing than what it was intended to. Now, and this is where the conspiracy sets in. Some people say that the Federal Reserve failed to prevent the Great Depression. Some people say it allowed the Great Depression. So to allow it to have more controls, because the argument made by the Fed was that it lacked the powers to stop the Great Depression. And if they were granted more powers, they could stop behaving so passively. And that's precisely what happened, which is also kind of what happened in Japan, by the way. So when the commercial banks have too much money in their reserves, they can create too much credit with that surplus. But the Fed could always up the requirement to how much they needed to keep in proportion on hand, which would allow them to hold how much credit each bank was allowed. So basically what he's saying that, the Federal Reserve used to set the rules for the banks where it's okay, we can force you to unilaterally have to have this much money on hand for the loans you create. It could be based on gold, or it could just be a rate that we set. So the gold is one thing, but the other side of the story is that it was just a central bank that said, go wild. Doesn't matter. We'll put more credit into your account. And the reason the Bretton Woods system happened was because, when the government goes into a deficit, when the government is spending a lot of money, it usually leads to them asking the Federal Reserve for help, give us some money. which usually leads to gold leaving America, which is what led Congress in 1965 to remove the requirement for the Fed to have a certain amount of gold on hand to create credit.
Once the U.S. was no longer backing dollars with gold, trade between nations no longer had to balance. When the U.S. was on a gold-backed monetary system, the Bretton Woods system, or before that, the gold standard, trade between nations had to balance. And here's why. For example, in the 19th century, if England had a very big trade deficit with France, then England's gold would literally have been put on a ship and sent over to France. And since gold was money, England's money supply would have contracted. And they would have had a very severe recession. Unemployment would have gone up, and they would have had deflation. And the opposite would have happened in France. France would have had more gold, more money, credit would have expanded, the economy would have boomed, they would have had inflation, and pretty soon the rich French, so England would have simply run out of money, so they wouldn't have been able to continue having a trade deficit. Trade would have come back into balance. And all the more so because France would have had more money, so it would have started buying more cheap English goods. And English, with less money, would have stopped buying so many expensive French goods, and trade would have come back into balance again. There was an automatic adjustment mechanism under the gold standard that ensured that trade between nations had to balance. And that's the way global trade worked up until the Bretton Woods system broke down in 1971. Afterwards, though, things changed radically. It took the U.S. a little while to discover this, but starting in the early 1980s, it started running very large trade deficits with the rest of the world, with Japan and Germany in particular. And by the middle of the 1980s, the U.S. trade deficit as a percentage of GDP had gone from zero, effectively, to 3.5% of GDP by the mid-80s. And this was totally unprecedented. Nothing like this had ever occurred before.
And this is during the 60s when everyone's talking about this is the New Deal. This is when government spending is at its max. During, a lot of progressives look back to this time. Like, why? This is why the AOCs of the world and the Bernie Sanders love this system, because they just look back to the 60s and say, why can't we do what we were doing back then? Just print the money. It's fake. It's made up. And that's one of the points you always come back to that I always try and keep in my head, which is that a lot of progressives love modern monetary theory, and they love it because, in my opinion, they take the exact wrong idea. Whereas they hear fiat currency, they hear lack of gold backing, and they think, oh, the money's fake. We can just give, the sneakers can be free. We can do reparations. That's what they're saying right now. What they're saying right now in Congress, there's a spicy Latina standing in front of a bunch of psychopaths with dementia saying that we can do reparations because the money isn't real. Yeah. And, the argument there is actually no, because I think to make modern monetary theory work, you really need a eugenicist's eye, because within this system, if you're looking at it properly, it says that if you waste the money, if you create credit and you give free money to unproductive people, you'll just destroy the economy. And then no one gets anything. It actually only works if you give it to productive forces, if you give it to something that, like, if you invest in tech, if you open the spigot of credit over tech innovation, that's one thing. If you open it over African Americans, it drives up inflation and everyone fucking dies. So they look at this and I think take the wrong thing, but that's the main story you're hearing right now.
I don't know how much of the conversation that you dove back into. I hashed this out, litigated this a bit with Kel for a couple of days there in the chat. The whole inflation bit that a lot of the guys are saying, it's like if you put it into tech, into quote unquote productive sectors, you don't get inflation. I did get him to come around on it, and I think a couple of the guys who stopped talking, I suppose, just admitted I was correct, which is that yes, if you put stuff into tech or into industry, you don't get inflation right away, but you do ultimately get inflation. There is actually an almost one-to-one relationship between it. It just depends on who the money goes to and how quickly it's spent. That's called the velocity of money, how often the money changes hands and for what, because the things that it changes hands for are the sectors that will be inflated. So if they're buying cheese, the cheese gets inflated. If they're buying housing, housing gets inflated. If they sit on the money and it goes internally in their sector, there's no inflation, except there might be internal inflation for labor within their sector, but that doesn't show up on CPI. And so you might see the inflation 5, 6, or 10 years later, and by that point, it's very hard for them to say the inflation was caused by that original action, but the truth is it was. That is actually what it was caused by. So, and the problem with that is, the second problem with it, like I was saying before, is you as a governor, as a government, saying, I know what productivity is, because you don't have a metric for what productivity is. I know you think you do, but AOC also thinks she does. AOC thinks that AOC believes that niggers are the most productive people on earth, and if only we would give them enough money, we would be living in Wakanda, right? She honestly believes that. So there is a metric for figuring out what's productive, and it's called the market, and that's what we use. So if you're not using the market to decide what is productive, you're falling into the exact same trap of the left-wingers who just want to throw money at a thing that they think will be good.
He does address this a bit later in the book, but I do want to just also call attention to that, which is true, because, you know, it's easy to go down this pathway and forget that central planning typically has a poor track record on this.
Horrible track record.
I think in the short term it can. I think but there's not a lot of examples of this. Like, again, I want to really call people's attention to the fact that this system has only been in existence for like 50 to 70 years, I think. Like, this is new. This is unprecedented. So when people try and forecast and say, well, here's how this could lead to infinite prosperity, I'm like, this is a completely mind-boggling new paradigm we're in right now. Let's just remember that. And let's remember that most of the evidence of these economic theories in practice were from the 20th century, and they're in relatively small windows of time. Like, the Japanese economy in the 20th century turned itself around very, very fast using sort of the central planning paradigm. But there's evidence that can be used to convert an agricultural economy into an industrialized economy.
We also want to talk, sorry, carry on.
No, but at the risk of, and, you know, this happened in Japan, also happened in China to the tune of, like, I don't know what, 200 million dead, happened in the Soviet Union to the tune of, I don't know how many millions of dead. Like, there is a human, I don't want people to lose sight of that, these huge tectonic shifts of reforms, even in the Princes of the Yen, that one clip I had there when they talked about, how they probably engineered the recession in the 90s. The recession in the 90s still led to like 20 million people dying from like suicide and poverty. So, like, let's not pretend that this is just like a thing you can just do for fun.
We're poking at the guys earlier talking about infinite growth, right? And I had made the joke in the chat too. It's like, no, the system is great. It works perfectly except for that one time that it doesn't and we all die, right? Because it does, if you want to say it worked on day 1 and it's now day 10 and it's still working, shit, man, it's probably going to be working 2 years from now. What I'm saying is your children are going to die of starvation. And every historical example we have of this kind of careless deficit spending, because, I mean, yeah, the current justifications, you know, when we're talking about MMT specifically and Mosler specifically, yeah, that's modern. But I mean, the Romans were clipping coins. That was their version of deficit spending. It was their version of, we're going to spend as many of these coins as we want. And all throughout history, bad money drives out good, and you lose production. You think you're getting production, but all you're doing is you're buying up existing stock. Production goes straight to hell because nobody wants to play in a market when the money isn't going for what's good. The money is going to whoever's friends with the senator, right? So this is that part of it. Although it seems very modern, that part of it is as old as history. So, and we do have historical examples that sometimes this falls apart in a week. Sometimes it takes 50 years to fall apart. Like the Japanese example is on the long side. It did take them a few decades for that to fall apart. And at the end of it, guys like Werner say, well, it wasn't their fault. It would have kept working if it weren't for the central banks. Well, I mean, history says you're wrong. History says it literally always falls apart every single time. If it's just central planning and deficit spending, it always falls apart.
Arguably, that's what we're like in the book. The central bankers, the princes of the yen, were kind of saying that. They were saying that we need reform now because the system that we have is failing. And so it's whether or not you believe they're lying. It's whether or not, like, you know, the book doesn't get into their minds. It just kind of does the play-by-play of what happened.
And I'm saying the motivations and who said what honestly doesn't even matter. And you get to the point and you say you have central planners implement a plan, it works temporarily, and then everybody dies. Like that in a nutshell is just the same story. Like you said, in the Chinese example, Soviet example, and now we're living through it right now. We actually had pretty good fiscal policy in North America for a long time, which is probably part of the reason that we didn't starve in like 1880. But now we are getting ready to starve. So
yeah. So just to reiterate for people, so the way it used to work is when someone deposited $100 in a commercial bank, regular bank, the commercial banks were only required to hold $20 in reserves and could loan out $80 of the $100 that you put in the bank. And over time, they got rid of the requirement to keep that 20.
So you talk about the reserve ratio. They do still have it, but it's tiny. It's like, I forget what it is, but it's a very small number now. And MMT is essentially saying, yeah, you don't even need the reserve ratio anymore.
That's what they're saying. Like, you don't need, you can just, the argument made in the book is that it's just because it's not tied to gold, because it's not tied to any commodity, and it's not tied to really any market, it's numbers on a spreadsheet. So it's like, you just change some numbers. Like, that's the line that's used, I believe, in this book. There's no actual transaction of anything. It's just a ledger that's being updated, kind of like the blockchain.
Yeah.
And stuff like this. What's interesting is the modern monetary theory gave birth to Bitcoin. It gave birth to cryptocurrency. Like, cryptocurrency was them looking at modern monetary theory and coming with a bright idea. Like, let's mess with this theory. Let's create a money and see how that behaves.
We don't know who created Bitcoin or why, though. It could have been Satoshi. It could have been the CIA. Like, I see the connection you're drawing, but it's not like we can say the intent of all the invention of cryptocurrency was to.
Well, I just mean, but based on the time Bitcoin and cryptocurrency emerged, I think it was created like as a test for this, because this is what people talked about. Like, when you were paying attention during the early days of cryptocurrency, the entire argument for Bitcoin came back to fiat currency. Everyone says Bitcoin's not real. The thing you heard every single person say was money's not real either.
I want to push back a little bit because I followed the crypto sphere for a while. I'm not the crypto guy, but all the arguments I heard for a long time in favor of crypto and in Bitcoin is that Bitcoin is not fiat. When we say fiat means a directive, right? So when we say fiat currency, we mean a currency whose value is a directive from the government. It's worth that money because the government tells you it is, and it's just trust. That's fiat. Bitcoin isn't fiat. The whole point to Bitcoin is it's permanently scarce. You can never make more of it other than by mining. So actually, Bitcoin is closer to gold in the sense that nobody can just make more Bitcoin. Whereas the government, they can by fiat increase the amount, which is to say by order or by directive, they can increase or decrease the amount just by signing a paper. So Bitcoin is, not only is Bitcoin the opposite, but in Bitcoin circles, the reason that Bitcoin is valuable is because it's the opposite. People who love Bitcoin and love crypto love it because they hate fiat currency. They love real money, and we can't have gold.
I shouldn't have used fiat as a synonym for fake, which is kind of how it's used too. Fiat, to clarify, fiat just means it's like backed by the government, but that's also them saying like it's just backed by the authority of the government. And kind of fiat currency within modern monetary theory is saying that all that matters is the authority. Right. It's kind of like the extreme of that. It's like, it's, before it was the authority of the central issuer plus gold plus whatever the commodity is. Like, no, it's just the authority itself.
And I do think it's interesting if you look at the gold and silver market, not to go on too much of its tangent here, but if you look at the gold and silver market, and a lot of people thought for a long time that they should shoot to the sky, and they have gone up quite a bit. But you have gold and silver ETFs and other financial devices which operate similarly to fiat now. So gold itself, as traded on let's say a futures market, is almost fiat in the sense that you have a couple of global organizations that artificially raise or lower the supply of the contracts for these paper gold, right? But with crypto, because nobody can increase it or decrease it artificially, you can't increase it artificially. It does actually follow the inflation of the other government currencies, the fiat currencies. And so what have you seen? You've seen it go from $1 to $2 to $50 to $60,000 like a few years ago, and now it's back down. What is it, like it's 18,000 Canadian or something right now? But like, if it is interesting that you're watching right now bad money driving out good. The good money is fleeing into other types of currency which are protected, like Bitcoin, and you're not even protected in gold right now because of the way that they run the gold market. So
yeah, it's really interesting how it all fits together, because like this is what he's saying the money revolution actually was. It was when America was freed from its obligations during the Bretton Woods system, and you had this free floating exchange rate and fiat currency. By fiat meaning it's mainly just backed by the authority of the government. And he says like monetary, if you actually look at the monetary policy, because the monetary policy is just the rules about the money, about the interest rates and everything like that. And he says it's usually nothing more than the board of the Federal Reserve deciding whether or not to expand credit or set interest rates. And he said like the explosion of credit growth in the 60s meant that the American economy was completely reliant on credit for growth. And you know, a lot of people like that because, you know, some people say that, oh, it pulled all these nations out of poverty, which I'm skeptical of, because, you know, pulling a nation out of poverty means that like the poverty line is set at like $1 a day, and you made so people make $1.01 a day. You know what I mean? Like above the poverty line. Yeah. It could be a bit of a trick too. But, you know, it was the 1960s and this influx of credit. He says this turned America from capitalism to creditism. And that's a word I thought you might like, especially.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
So we're not even in a capitalist paradigm anymore. We're removed from that. This is literally just credit creation and trying to outpace credit creation.
Pointing out that if we don't have credit growth, the economy goes into recession. And if credit contracts, we have a depression. So the U.S. economy now is dependent on credit growth. And the book, part 2, shows that anytime total credit in the U.S., and this is adjusted for inflation, anytime total credit grew by less than 2% from 1950 up until the crisis of 2008, the U.S. went into recession. So we need at least 2% credit growth adjusted for inflation just to stay out of recession. That happened, there were 9 recessions between 1950 and 2009.
And so you said up until 2007, you know, we get into the modern days. The problem was the Fed and the banks created more credit than anyone could ever even begin to pay the interest on. That's the problem that we got into.
Because there's no real money or anything productive, any real capital asset backing it. It's all just on paper. Yeah.
Exactly. Creditism, you know, aside from capitalism, creditism, we would define that as it's where credit and consumption drive the economy more than saving and investment. And he says that's why like the accumulation of capital doesn't even matter. And that's such a strange way to look at it. But he's like, yeah, like this is why like a lot of the leftists are not even playing in the 21st century. A lot of the Marxists, like they're still wrapped up in this like capital ownership thing. And they don't really factor in how capital moves now and how credit just fuels everything, which is arguably way worse. But it's like, what is like the entire idea of ownership has changed too.
Yeah.
I think I cut you off there.
No, I'm just going to say it's funny because to the extent that people are lagging behind this and they haven't caught up to the reality of deficit spending, those are the people that are, even if they're leftist, are actually correct that when the creditism system finally does collapse, and it's going to collapse, then you'll have reality again. And in reality, the guys on the floor, on the concrete, with the equipment and the stock and the human capital, the knowledge and gas in their gas tanks, those are the people that always win. They're people that always won throughout history, and the only time they lose is in cities when creditism and deficit spending takes over. But it's funny, like the worker will have his day again. With the worker or the landlord or whoever will have their day again, but it's not going to be the fucking money lender.
And what do we say here? We say every episode, we love landlords.
We love our landlords.
Tip your landlord. Do me a favor, after you're done listening to this episode, tip your landlord and don't even tell him about it. Secretly tip your landlord. You know what? Start overpaying your rent and lie about it. That actually got people pissed off when I said that last episode. It's like, that was actually pretty fucking cringe that you said that. I don't like my landlord.
We're obviously kidding. Sorry, guys.
I didn't think that could be more obvious, but there's so many dog shit takes in our sector. Like I kind of get it. I get why people would be like, okay, wait, you guys have. I mean, not long ago we were talking about some pretty esoteric shit. I could see if you're from the outside, maybe we're back on our bullshit for landlords now.
My thing about the landlords, the reason that I think it's funny to joke about the landlords is because it's so polarizing, and it just shouldn't be. A landlord is like a fucking hot dog stand owner. Like, some of them are assholes and some of them are cool, and there's honestly no fucking way to tell unless you know the guy. So, like, it's hilarious to be like, oh, what's that? You own a thing? You're a horrible person. No, you're a hero. Like, no, he's just a guy who owns a thing. What the fuck are we talking? How is this even a thing?
I saw the funniest take. It was someone from like the Patriotic Socialist Front, kind of like the Strasserists, like our side, where there's like, they're talking about those that Black Wall Street riot. Remember that? Like, where was that? The city that was in? Anyway, it was that famous, like, fake made up thing where Black Wall Street was burned. And it's like, it's difficult because on one hand, it's a terrible, outrageous hate crime. But on the other hand, it was capital owners and shop owners who suffered, which is good. I just love the idea that we've gone so far out there, like we're just celebrating when a black store owner gets his shit ruined.
Not because he's black, but because we hate stores.
We hate stores so much. And just back to the original point, I don't know if I'll get through the whole thing because there's a lot to talk about with this book. It's a very, very good book. He says the problem with creditism is it needs to grow at least 2% every year for the entire system to operate. And if it begins to contract, this is the problem. This is why growth matters. Like, it needs to keep growing, because if it begins to contract, that's when the banks get spooked. That's when loans stop being issued. That's when everyone starts saving. The entire fucking thing spirals and collapses. And that's what happened in 2008. The 2008 collapse, which, looking back, a lot of people talk about that collapse kind of flippantly, like it was just like any other, recession. Like, no, that almost took the entire world with it. I think we should like recontextualize that. The 2008, the mortgage crisis, as it's called, if that was not dealt with, that was going to destroy the fucking world. Like, because everything was so over leveraged. This was the MMT coming home to roost. Like, this was your scenario.
Exactly.
And so the 4 reasons why that financial collapse occurred was the too many risky loans were going bad. The leverage ratio was way, way, way too high. There was an over-reliance on short-term sources of funding. And the liquidity reserves in banks were basically non-existent. In the very first century of its existence, the Fed created less than $2 trillion. In the second half of 2008 alone, it created $1.3 trillion. Like, that's insane. Like, within half of a year, it created $1.3 trillion.
And then in 2020 and 2021, they did that 5 times. Five times over. Yeah.
During COVID, 5 times over.
And it hasn't. We're just starting to see it. Like, literally, as we're recording this, it's starting to come home.
Yeah, and he said quantitative easing basically, in his mind, saved the global economy by lowering interest rates, pushing up asset prices, and flooding the market with liquidity. They kind of saved the economy. They reflated it afterward as well. But what he introduced here was something that I wanted to talk about in depth, and we might not be able to do it this time. But there's many graphs in this book, and it's a very, very good book. I'd highly recommend it. But one of the things he talks about is the wealth effect for homeowners. That anyone who owns an asset, like in a real estate asset, a house, the government has an interest in boosting house prices because they know what happens when people's house prices go up. Like clockwork, they remortgage their homes and start taking money out of the homes, which floods that money right into the consumer market. So if they ever want to increase consumer spending or get the money moving in the economy, one thing they like to see is house prices go up, which is to say that, when we talk about modern monetary theory, I like to explain how it's being used against people as well. So realize that the government could have an interest in keeping house prices high. Now, this is just me talking here. This isn't in the book. But consider that there's one demographic that the government is extremely reliant on right now, and that's boomers. There could be the world we're living in right now as young people could very well be that the government is trying to milk as much consumer spending out of boomers as they possibly can by making sure that when they sell their homes, they're selling them for $5 million for their shitty bungalows. And then what do boomers do? What they don't do is save. That's one thing we know about boomers. Boomers are being encouraged not to pass money down, not to invest. They're being encouraged to spend it on travel and shit and stuff and to keep this whole fucking thing going. So because of this system, again, this is my speculation, you could see the entire economy geared against young people, at least in the short to midterm, until boomers start dying off. But that's just my one theory that I've got. What do you think about that?
Of course, absolutely. I think that's a fact. I think you'd have to come up with some pretty strong arguments for why that isn't already the case in the U.S. and Canada especially.
Yeah, and one thing also to remember is that all of this, what we're talking about right now, isn't just in America. What we call the credit blitz, this explosion of credit, occurred all over the world, and the big problem as we moved away from the gold standard was that all this credit being created, like in Japan, but everywhere else in the world, by other central banks, was flooding into America. So all this money starts flooding in. That's kind of how Japan went to war with America, with its trade, and in the 70s went to war with auto manufacturers. Like there was real trade wars going on at the time. Drove up trade deficits in America, which caused America to borrow from these same countries in the 70s. Like this whole system created a huge trade imbalance. And when people talk about all this, credit flowing into America and buying up real estate and stuff, that's kind of what they're talking about. But it's not just an American phenomenon. It's like the trillions of dollars created by these foreign banks was transferred into dollars and then used to invest in American assets, driving up asset prices and keeping interest rates down, which also contributed to the 2008 financial crisis. And the Fed pretends to not know why this happened. He writes that in the book. Like, they know why this is all happening. They just can't do anything about it, right? He makes the case in the book, we've already kind of went through this, but he makes the case that I just want to repeat again, that inflation has little to do with money supply or monetary policy. He's got some graphs in here that explain it a bit better. I'll put them in the clip. But it has more to do with globalization and this money supply flooding in. Historically, it was money supply and demand shocks and supply shocks. But globalization really kicked off in the 1980s as America was funding its trade deficits with foreign capital from other countries with trade surpluses. Prior to this, a nation could not import more than they exported, because everything would eventually rebalance through unemployment and economic slumps. But that system, he's saying, was completely out. And what was happening was there was just all this fucking crazy foreign, like the American, this is what we were saying with Zihan, which is that America is a massive trade sink for the entire world. Like part of the reason why America is so important to the global trade system is because we just buy so much fucking shit. Yeah. And so many these producer countries can sell to America. Yeah. But the way the trade surpluses work, like it actually shouldn't make sense the way it is. But
and it doesn't. They haven't actually broken physics with this. All they've done is they've prevented it from correcting itself, and they're winding it up like a spring. So when it finally does correct, it's going to be a one for the ages. It's going to be one of the biggest. I will say, I think it will be the biggest economic disaster in human history. I don't know if it's coming now, but like over the next 50 to 100 years, max, probably sooner than that. It's the biggest economic disaster. It might be an extinction level event. It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Yeah. So I'm going to get to the part you'll probably disagree with, but it's the main thesis of the book. And I don't know how much, because we're already well over 2 hours, but I can keep going. I don't really give a shit. But he said, here's this case. Between 2008 and 2021, both the housing collapse and COVID led the Federal Reserve to inject trillions of dollars into the economy. And he says, and I know which part you're going to disagree with here, but I'm going to say it anyway. He says, inflation only rose by around 1.7% per year. He said the influx of cash had no discernible effect on prices when it should have led to hyperinflation. I can kind of hear the vein on your head going through the mic. Did you want to just quickly address that? Or
Yeah,
I guess you already did.
He said, yeah, I did in the chat, but I'll just repeat more or less what I discussed with the guys in the chat. So from 2008 to 2021. Actually, before we start, when was this book written? I thought it was older than that.
No, this was fairly recent. This would have been...
It's actually critical whether or not it was released in the past year or it was previous to that, because he wouldn't actually have the new data.
2022.
2022. So, because some of this data is actually quite new. Like, inflation data lags by like a quarter-ish. Depending on how they look at it, CPI, and there's... Anyways, okay. First of all, yes, this is like a dodge. Like, we didn't see the inflation right away, so there's no inflation. No, retard. Like, I feel like this is intentionally meant to confuse people. Anybody who knows anything about inflation and the money supply knows that inflation lags the money supply, and how much it lags the money supply, it depends on how the money is spent or where the money goes. We just talked about this. So the second thing is, so that we know there's a lag. And he's saying, well, it's up to 2021. There hasn't been any inflation. First of all, yes, there has. There's been colossal inflation. And we did see it, but we saw it on a lag. Just because there's a lag doesn't mean it's happened. It's also not over, because this type of money supply increase might be causing inflation for 30 fucking years. And the fact that they won't look at that inflation over 30 years and say that it's not, we had no control over that. That's not our fault. We're only looking at the inflation in a 12-month window. That's fucking retarded. Anyways, the other important thing here is he's talking, this is a total statistical dodge. He's saying we increased the money supply by X amount between 2008 and 2021. No, all of that increase, not all of it, 90% of that increase happened over the course of like 16 months right up into the ass of 2021. So fuck you with all of your stuff about, but we've been pouring money into the system in 2009 and 2011. No, you weren't. You were actually deflating at the end of the financial crisis as interest rates came up. Like, you know that. That's a fucking lie. You were deflating, to not a lot, but to a certain extent, like by which I mean destroying money, like decreasing the money supply. Most of that increase, almost all of it, happened with like literally at the beginning of COVID. And they're still doing it. It's still, I shouldn't say that. No, they did remove some of it in 2022. But the point is now they're removing it. And even though they're removing it, we're getting massive inflation spikes. And I'm sure now they're going to say, but these inflation spikes, for all we know, they're caused by us removing money. No, they're caused by all the money you dumped into the system that you thought was going to a productive enterprise is now being spent. And guess what? Not only are people spending it, but the stuff they're spending it on, we don't make anymore. And we're spending it, now it's made in China, and we can't even get it from the boats because the whole fucking supply chain is fucked up. All of that is actually related to the malinvestment of your fucking random print money that you gave to your friends, right? When you do that, and so I'm going off on a tangent now, but the larger story is, when you malinvest, you don't actually produce the things the market wants. And so when you talk about spending causing inflation, people go out to buy toilet paper, and there isn't enough of it because you gave it to your friends in the dildo industry and they made 1 million dildos, which we don't want. We want toilet paper. And that's why toilet paper is so fucking expensive. Anyway, sorry.
Sector-wise, dildos are adjacent to toilet paper.
They are, actually.
Like, functionally.
You got one, you're going to want some of the other. Maybe not.
Let's say if I run out of there's a lot of guys out there. I'm not going to weigh in on this, but apocalypse scenario, if you're in a life or death shitting situation and you don't have toilet paper, you might want to reach for the dildo more than a fistful of knives.
Yep.
Maybe, and in this world, like, there is no more printed money because of all the fiat currency, because of all the credits. So you can't even reach for a bunch of dollar bills to wipe your ass.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is there were never dollar bills anyways. I mean, for decades now, it's all just digital ledgers, unless you can wipe your ass with a hard drive. So,
good point. You can, but you can in Canada because we only have dollar coins, which, which would be better to wipe your ass with a toonie
wipe
or
your
a
ass
dildo.
with a roll of dimes.
There's no cause for violence on this show. Okay, can I get to the plan now? Because I want to say his plan, because there might be some parts of it you like. There might be some parts you don't like. But let's start with the big headline here. The U.S. government could easily invest $10 trillion over 10 years primarily into technological development. This is his claim. While $10 trillion is just kind of a projected amount that he's coming up with, it should be decided through trial and error, fed in by degrees. The rule is invest as much as possible, as fast as possible, and find the ceiling on what that is based on once you start to see the inflation go up. Then you try and deflate as much as you can with a monetary policy.
Right, which has never worked. Which has never worked in the history of monetary policy, but he knows that.
And he's saying the windfall of credit would likely push asset and stock prices up, in which case you would need to increase of capital gains taxes. He's got a few things in place to try and account for asset prices and stock prices going up. Essentially what he would want to do, he says, create credit, open the spigots of credit over the following technological industries: renewable energy, neuroscience, robotics, nanotech, biotech, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and genetic engineering. So this is another angle that I'd like to just explore, because we didn't talk about it last time. But now that we're talking about an economic policy and we're talking about practical ideas, really the sad and scary thing is that I think there are a lot of people taking this seriously, and they are doing this. And that's why I kind of wanted to go down this path, because just to let people know, I'm not judging whether anything of this is right or wrong. What I'm trying to do is make a map for people to explain what is happening right now. And I think all the technologies that we complain about, all our dystopian fantasies about, transhumanism and all that, like, that is being supercharged right now. And I don't really know what to do about that, because even if we don't open the spigots over these technologies, they are being developed, and that's out of our hands. We can't really stop that. We're in an arms race right now with China, whether you want it or not. And the sectors of that arms race, the technological development arms race, are artificial intelligence, quantum computing, genetic engineering, and renewable energy. And I think the power players in the world, mainly China, mainly America, also Japan, a few others, they know that whoever wins that race will probably get to define the next century. So that's what's happening right now. This is why, this is why I think it's full steam ahead from a lot of these people, like the billionaire class, the elite class, whatever you want to call them. This is happening. This is why I don't think transhumanism can ever be off the table, because we talked about this when we talked about Nassim Taleb's The Black Swan book. He says there's certain technologies that are kind of black box technologies, or like what Donald Rumsfeld would call like a known unknown. We all know that this technology is out there. We know that this technology is achievable. We don't have it yet. We don't know how long it's going to take, but we know someone's going to get it. Yeah. And I think that's the logic dictating a lot of these nations and these supranational entities that kind of function like nations anyway. They're in a race to find who discovers this first, because they're going to have all the power. It's a scramble to power. And that's why I think that even if America doesn't do this, China's essentially doing this right now. The model that we're talking about right now, modern monetary theory, this is the Communist Party of China's policy right now. They're just not good at it. And that might be evidence of what you were saying, that centralized planning just doesn't work very well. But the China's doing this. They're obsessed with renewable tech, but they're just kind of fucked with it. However, they are, he makes a point in the book that they're kicking our asses with 5G technology. They're kicking our asses in certain ways. Yeah. And the fear is that China gets there first. What do you think about that?
So I think if we're talking just about the technology, I agree that there is an arms race, and it's important for the good guys to hold it. Like, we want to have, if this technology exists, we need to have it. Now, does that mean that the government should print money for it? No, we're late. I could talk through it for the reasons why. There's a lot of reasons why you don't want government to just print money for that, because you won't. The thing is, you won't actually get long-term robust productivity out of that. The same thing that always happens will happen. You'll get short-term productivity, and the whole thing will collapse, and you'll actually permanently kill that industry, and it'll be brought under the government wing as a zombie. But if you actually want that stuff, what you would do is create a tax-free, deregulated trade zone for that industry as a pilot, and you let them build there, and you don't fuck with them, you don't tax them, you don't bother them, you stay out of it. But the other thing is if you're developing that technology because you want it for you, that's one thing. If you're developing it because it's an arms race and you're worried about China getting it, there's a really simple solution: is nuke China. And it drives me nuts how often I hear this brought up in this kind of pansy way of negotiating, like, oh, industrially we need to like maintain labor competitiveness with China. Like, why? It's a slave nation. Bomb them. There's no reason the earth shouldn't just be white. Like, I don't, how on one side we're talking about all of these things like geopolitically, and then on the other side, when we talk about our internal finances, we're letting what another country, a rival nation who we by all rights are already at war with, we're in a silent war with them already, a Cold War, why we're talking about our economy as it relates to their trade. We shouldn't be trading with them. We should be trading bullets with them. We should be trading bombs with them right now. So to me, it's totally disingenuous for people to talk about the technological arms race as it relates to finance and fiscal policy. Like, don't involve that. You're fucking muddying the entire issue.
Fuck, I could already hear Judas coin going to the moon over the last rant. Let me just say, people really turned against me on the last episode. I thought I made some good points. Everyone's like, "No, I like when he said we should just kill them all." I'm like, "Yeah, I know."
I'm speaking to the common man, to the lowest retard of them all, which is me.
I want people to know this was a 450-page book. I read every page of these books, and I made like 3 pages of notes. And it's like if it's an election, you win based on after all this stuff. But we should nuke China.
Yeah, I just say, hey, it's all gay, guys, gay and retarded, and I win.
Everything's gay and maybe rape, and also nuke China.
It's so much easier to destroy than to create, I think, is the lesson here.
And you know what? People love easy things. Easy things are fun. You know what's also easy? Eating fudge.
Winner, Gagnon.
It is.
It's you know what's easy? Busting. Easiest thing to do.
Yes, it is.
Anyone, you could go whack off for free. People don't know this. The whacking off is free.
All you dumbasses out there have been paying to whack off. Damn. Fuck.
I got to wrap this up. I've got to say the last little bit here because I want to do this book justice. So one model for what he's talking about is the federal government adopting a venture capital model with a 60-40 split on returns, where the companies that are kind of more invested in by the government will be listed on the NASDAQ with taxpayers receiving the 60% of those returns. That's kind of one model he is for like the innovation. He said American investment in technology declined from 7.1% of the GDP to 3.1% since the 1960s. And he says, well, what does that mean? How does the government invest in technology? That's what we're talking about right now, right? And that's one thing that you're concerned about, is the government just owning all this tech. He says there's 3 types of technological research: basic research, applied research, and experimental research. In America, has slowed down all of its research in the past decades, being overtaken by China. And he said the government spending in basic research would be the key here. So basic research is essentially what they did with the internet and what they did with semiconductors. So that's like very, very like basic stuff. Then applied research is the companies that take that and make stuff with it. So he was saying, well, if we get the government to invest in basic research, like the nuts and bolts shit, the boring stuff, and leave applied research to the private organizations, that would be one way to do it. So it wouldn't be like necessarily governments owning companies. They would just be doing this research that isn't even economically feasible for a lot of private companies. Like a lot of private companies, like when it comes to AI, they're kind of doing it now, but a lot of the research is very front loaded, and venture capital owns that completely. But it's like, well, what if, like the real rigorous, like getting quantum computing going, getting a lot of like the genetic research done. Like maybe we take care of that and make it open source. And then, the other companies, kind of what like the Fed does with the banks, which like, we'll give you the credit, you figure it out. So that to me was a hybrid model of the central planning and the free market, like you were talking about, which is kind of, I know we don't like the whole way it's done right now, but the model, which is like there's the central planning of like the bank releasing credit, but who the loans go to is done by the banks or the credit unions or whoever it might be. And there might be a model here. If the problem is the commercial banks, because a lot of people have problems with commercial banks, is there a more tweaked model where more credit goes to like credit unions and they can lend to smaller organizations? You know what I mean? Like maybe there's a way to rejigger this where it's a hybrid of it maintains what you like about free market innovation and price discovery. But you see what I'm saying there? Does that affect your opinion at all?
No, because you have, again, it's the whole thing about like you're trying to break physics. You're trying to get around these fundamental a priori rules, but like it just doesn't work in the long run. It doesn't work. I'm already on board with, there's cases like a war economy type case where you use this as a weapon against an enemy, internal or external. I've already agreed that is something that I would be on board with. But and that's why I was saying a minute ago, like if the intent is to create these technologies as a weapon to destroy the Chinese, sure. If the intent is to create these technologies for our own edification, for our own growth and stability, absolutely not. Absolutely not. People don't need AI. People need sandwiches that don't have microplastics in them. People need a water supply that doesn't have endocrine disruptors. That's what we need right now. And we need jobs and we need houses. So we don't actually need AI, and every dollar that's put into AI is a dollar taken away from sandwiches that don't have plastic in it.
I'm very happy you did that. And this is why I invest in Judas coin. I want to remind people, because a lot of people are telling some tall tales out there. I am the original investor in Judas coin.
Yeah, he wrote the code.
And I know what they want me to say. They want me to say I go long on Judas coin. And I'm not going to say it. What I just said was me saying what I wouldn't say, which isn't me saying it.
You haven't said it. Nevertheless, it shall be clipped.
But I like that because really, I think that recontextualizes the entire thing, which is what is the sum total of all this? What is the sum total of all of this innovation? It's microplastics in your fucking sandwiches, isn't it?
Yep, it is.
The sum total of all of this is the latest human generations in the West being bored with fucking neural diseases, and that the only technology we can invest in is like, how can we make ourselves less human? Because that's the thing. Like if the plan going forward is to supercharge in the direction of gene editing and quantum computing, like it sounds like there's no good end to any of this. And I think once again circle back to my original concern and my trepidation with the entire system, it's like something feels wrong here. I think a lot of people, you get excited about this. The mind reels at the possibilities.
Of course.
And I'm interested in this. And like I said, I'm trying to draw a map for people to say, let's look at the landscape, find out where we are, find out where we are headed right now, where we'd like to be headed. As long as we have the map, we can figure out where we're going. That's what all this is about. I don't see any strategy that feels good. That's kind of the thing I'm trying to get at here. And that's also the thing you're getting at as well, which is
I'm saying there isn't one. And I understand why people want there to be one. I want there to be one, but I understand that there isn't one. The only way out of this is extreme amounts of pain, deprivation, starvation, and death is the only way through this. So I'm sorry, but it's going. And I'm not saying I'm going to do it. I'm just saying, like, you've wound the economy up like a spring. At some point, it's going to snap back. You can't break physics. What goes up must come down.
And also just to remind people, this did already happen. This was the 2008 collapse, and they solved that with, creating all this deficit. But like we know what it feels like when this happens. So just imagine that magnified by the amount of leverage out there. And also, remember, just to say this, we talked about the cause of the 2008 collapse, the 2006-2008 collapse was over-leveraging, no liquidity, and bad debts. Like, well, Chris, do you think it's possible that a bank can loan bad debts again? Do you think there's a reality where something could be invested? Maybe they're not geniuses. Maybe they still do allocate the money properly. As long as that can happen, that's always going to be an axe dangling over your neck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even within the model, it's like all we need to do is allocate this money to the good stuff. It's like, well, what are the chances? Like, first we need to start from a position of we need the government to be staffed by completely different people.
Yeah,
like you
need
for this to work.
Out of the banks, you need the people making the decisions to actually have our best interests at heart, and to have a governmental system which is robust against corruption. Which we have the exact opposite. Democracy is purpose-built for corruption.
This is the thing. Like, the system is interesting, but let's also recall we need to sweep everyone out of the banks and government to start doing this, because like no one in there right now would you want doing anything. They're trying to do it right now, and what they're trying to do is give $3 trillion to like every black person in America, and not even really try and figure out if they were descendants of slaves. It's just to everyone.
Like, that's what the Democrats want to do, which is retarded. But like the Republicans are giving trillions of dollars to Raytheon so that they can make missiles which they fire into the side of a hill just so they can keep their budget. So like in both cases, the money goes to something anti-productive. Not only is it not productive, it destroys resources.
Yeah. All right. I think we're kind of been over. I think that's a good end to it, though.
Yeah, man.
All right. I will talk to you next week.
Super. See ya.
All right. Bye.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.